Manhood Part 2.
Our natures are like oil, compound us with anything, yet will we strive to swim to the top. A poor Virginia cabin gave the seed, and from its dark and lowly door there came a peer of princes in the world's acclaim, a master's spirit for the nation's need, strong, silent, purposeful beyond his kind, the arc of rugged force on brow and lip. Straight on he goes, nor turns to look behind, with one idea foremost in his mind, like the keen prow of some unforging ship. I would say to every young man, no matter what his color, to choose as early as possible a good, clean-cut business, something that will help make the world better, and then strive in every worthy way to make that business the most successful of its kind in the world. The boy who lets obstacles overcome him will not succeed. The great thing is to succeed in spite of discouragements. Many a pen has been used against this inward passion, declaring it a secret poison, a gallant madness and the mother of hypocrisy. The great Wolsey cried, "I charge thee, fling away ambition." Bose said, "The most aspiring are frequently the most contemptible, but there are exceptions to the rule. Where there is no aspiration, there is no endeavor." It is not wrong to strain mental and physical energies to succeed, provided it is to be good and to do good. The ambition of Napoleon to lay waste the town of Acre was wrong, that of Wellington to intercept the scourge of Europe, right. To be ambitious of true honor, of the true glory and perfections of our natures, is, as Sir Philip Sidney said, the very principle and incentive of virtue. One of the customs of the Norsemen was that of wearing a pickaxe crest with the motto, "Either I will find a way or make one." An adage of the day reads, "Where there's a will there's a way." What one wills to do can usually be done. George Stephenson determined to make an engine to run between Liverpool and Manchester at the rate of 12 miles an hour. The Quarterly Review ridiculed the idea, saying, "As well trust oneself to be fired off on a Congreve rocket." He did it, nevertheless. Prince Bismarck's greatest ambition was to snatch Germany from Austrian oppression and to gather round Prussia, in a North German confederation, all the states whose tone of thought, religion and interest were in harmony with those of Prussia. To attain this end, he once said, "I would brave all dangers, exile, even the scaffold. What matters if they hang me, provided the rope with which I am hung binds this new Germany firmly to the Prussian throne." And he did it. There is nothing wrong in aspiring high. George Washington proposed to carve his name higher than any other on the Natural Bridge in Virginia, and did it. Alfred Harmsworth, king of the penny press, said on entering journalism, "I will master the business of editing and publishing." At 21 he had a little capital, at 30 he was a millionaire, and later became head of the largest publishing house in the world. Emerson once said, "Hitch your wagon to a star." It is but a natural condition of a healthful life when energies seek an outlet in some lofty activity. Better endeavor if but to fail, than never try at all. "I know," says Morris, "how far high failure overleaps the bounds of low successes." The sense of such makes us capable of a grave and holy sense of the real soberness and meaning of life. George Eliot, in writing the last words of her most powerful book, exclaims, "It is so much less than what I hoped for." A great artist was once highly praised for a beautiful painting which he had just completed. "Ah, do not praise me," he sadly said,
It may be very beautiful, but I aimed at perfection. When Napoleon started on his campaign, he was ridiculed and nicknamed the Little Corporal, which cut him to the quick, but it proved to be a goad which stirred him to become a great general. In one of our courts, a poor carpenter was once planing a magistrate's bench, when an onlooker inquired, "Why are you so careful with such a rough piece of furniture?" "Because I wish to make it for the time when I shall sit as judge upon it," was the reply. And that time came.
In 1805 there was born in London a boy of a hated and branded people. When 16 years of age he became a clerk in a solicitor's office, and, to the amusement of his companions, he was wont to say, "I intend to be Prime Minister of England." He had no liberal education, yet he won honors of literary skill and scholarship. He was ambitious, and eventually won his way to Parliament. When he attempted to deliver his first speech, his high-flown style and extravagant gestures provoked laughter and hisses, so that he took his seat with great mortification. In doing so, he uttered a remarkable prophecy, "I shall sit down now, but the time will come when you will hear me." True to the utterance, that time came to Benjamin Disraeli, when, in Shakespeare's words, he could have said, "People and senators, be not affrighted, fly not, stand still, ambition's debt is paid." Years ago a poor German boy named Schliemann read of the siege of Troy, and made up his mind to find the ruins of that ancient city. He procured books and taught himself 6 or 7 languages. He persevered and prospered until as a merchant he made a fortune. Every step of his study and money-making was taken with the aim of fulfilling the vow of his boyhood. In due time he started eastward with a company of laborers, and for long years pursued his search. At last success crowned his efforts. Troy was discovered, and the gold, silver, and bronze articles of the Trojan king were dug out of his palace, and placed on exhibition at South Kensington, England. One day while wandering about Cincinnati, a young artist saw a sign which read, "Peter Skinner, chairmaker." "Why can't I make chairs?" he asked himself. He straightway entered the establishment, resolved to ask for a position. In order to get to the office, he had to pass through the paint room, and the sight of several busy workers prompted him to inwardly exclaim, "Anyway, I can paint chairs."
The firm wanted a hand, and he was engaged to come the next morning to work in the paint shop. As he wended his way back, he tarried a moment to see how the painters did their work. That evening, when he reached his room in the boarding house, he borrowed a brush and an old chair, and began practicing. Next morning he was on hand at the chair factory, and there continued to work for 2 months at $9 per week. No one ever discovered that he was not an experienced chair painter. During his leisure time at the boarding house, he made pencil drawings and dropped them carelessly on the floor so that they would attract attention. The landlord, a colonel in the militia, possessed a strong, characteristic face, and the artist drew him in uniform and dropped this picture on the floor of his room. His chief ambition was to return to portrait painting. He thought the drawing would please the colonel, and it did, so much so that it led to his receiving a commission to paint the portraits of the colonel and his family, consisting of 5 members, at $5 each. With this work to occupy him, he left the chair factory, and soon the reputation of James H. Beard, the celebrated portrait and animal painter, was made. History records thousands of those who have pressed their way upward until they were crowned with success in spite of the distressing, discouraging, circumstantial law of gravitation, in which poverty and uncouth ancestry have played an important part. What these have done, any other boy can do, providing he argues not against heaven's hand or will, not bate a jot of heart or hope, but still bear up and steer right onward. There is, however, a spirit of discontent manifested by many who envy those a few rounds higher on life's social or business ladder, and who are determined to surpass them at whatever cost. Such ambition is justly foredoomed to disappointment, like Alexander's, who wept because there were no more worlds for him to conquer, and like Pisistratus, to whom the Athenian lawgiver said, "Were it not for your ambition, you would be the best citizen of Athens."
Ambition that rises from discontent or selfishness is false. It lacks conscience to engineer it. A boy is only fit to go higher as he demonstrates faithfulness where he is. A boy that simply wants to climb without endeavoring to do well in the position he holds is, as Beecher said, neither fit to be where he is, nor yet above it. He is already too high, and should be put lower. Out of the frying pan into the fire, though not his motto, will doubtless be his result. Not long ago, at Ellis Island, a large number of immigrants were awaiting examination. Among them was a tall Polish lad with a little black bag under his arm. When his turn came to answer the inevitable question, "How much money have you?" he smiled, and frankly answered none. "But don't you know you can't come in here if you have no money, and no friend to speak for you?" "Where are you going?" asked the inspector. "To Fall River first. I have a friend there. Then I shall see the whole country." "You will hear of me," he answered. The inspector proceeded rather sharply, "How will you get to Fall River? Where will you eat and sleep tonight?" "I shall be all right," replied the lad confidently. "With this," tapping the black bag, "I can go anywhere. What is it?" The Pole laughed, and opening the bag, took out a cornet. It was a fine instrument, and gave evidence of loving care. "Can you play it well?" asked the officer, kindly. In answer, the young man stepped out into an open space, and lifting the horn to his lips, began the beautiful intermezzo from Cavalleria Rusticana. At the very first note, everyone in the great building stood still and listened. The long lines of immigrants became motionless. The forlorn waiters in the pit looked up, and their faces became tender. Even the meanest among them seemed to feel the charm of the pleading notes. When the music ceased, there was a burst of applause. Shouts of "Bravo, good boy, give us some more," came from every side. The physicians, who a few moments before had made their hurried and not over-gentle examination, joined in the applause.
The officer who had questioned him so sharply slapped him on the back. The commissioner himself had come up from his office at the sound of the horn and asked for particulars. When he had heard them, he turned to the agent of the Fall River boats and said, "Give this lad a passage, including meals, and charge it to me." "I will charge it to myself," said the agent, and he took the young Pole by the arm and led him away. "With this I can go anywhere," showed not only his ambitious spirit, but demonstrated faithfulness in the prosecution of his studies, which now stood him in good stead and made him master of the situation. How true, as Massinger sang, "Man was marked, a friend in the creation, to himself, and may, with fit ambition, conceive the greatest blessings and the highest honors appointed for him if he can achieve them the right and noble way." Ambition, to succeed, must seize opportunity by the forelock. Behind she is bald, if you seize her by the forelock, you may hold her, if suffered to escape, not Jupiter himself can catch her again. "Do that which lies nearest you," is an injunction worth obeying, and though not the most satisfactory, may be the stepping stone to something higher. John D. Rockefeller, who is computed to be worth $300 million, earned his first money hoeing potatoes, and when 35 years of age owned but $1,000. When Edison was a very poor young man, walking the streets in search of work, he happened to step into an office in Wall Street. The telegraph recording machine was out of order, and no one could make it work. Instead of pleading his case in general statements, he simply asked if he might try his hand on the bulky machine. He was permitted, and was successful. This was the turning point in his career toward fortune. He not only had knowledge and skill enough to make a machine go, but he had wit enough to perceive the opportunity just at hand. Some things are difficult to perceive because they are close to us. But this is all the more reason why we should look for them and with the barest possibility seize them.
Ambition which ennobles must do well whatever there is to be done. Gladstone's advice to boys was, be thorough in what you do, and remember that, though ignorance often may be innocence, pretension is always despicable. President Garfield tells of a schoolmate who established a factory for the single purpose of making hammers, which he had brought to great perfection, and in which he took a great pride. The statesman said to his old friend, "By this time you must be able to make a pretty good hammer." The hammermaker, who was shipping his wares by the thousands to all parts of the earth, replied, "No, we do not make any pretty good hammers. We make the best hammers that can be made." "I commission thee, my son," said an aged artist, whose eye was failing and hand trembling, "do thy best." The young man hesitated, thinking the duty too vast to finish his master's work, but the injunction "do thy best" rang in his ears. With prayer for help and high purpose in heart, the young man began. As he wrought, his hand grew steady, his conception cleared, each stroke became a masterstroke until with tearful exultation, the aged artist gave over into the hand of Leonardo da Vinci the task from which his own trembling hand was dropping, which task for da Vinci meant a worldwide reputation. "I was invited," said the late D.W. Richardson, "to give an address at St. Andrews University, and to listen in the evening to a lecture by another man like myself, an outsider. I was not personally acquainted with this other man, but I knew that he filled an important judicial office in Scotland, and was considered one of the most able and learned, as well as one of the wittiest men in that country. He chose for his subject self-culture, and for an hour held us in a perfect dream of pleasure. For my own part, I could not realize that the hour had fled. The lecture ended at 7 o'clock, and at 8 I found myself seated at dinner by the side of the lecturer, at the house of one of the university professors. In the course of the dinner I made some reference to the hall in which the exercises of the day had been held, how good it was for sound, and what a fine structure to look upon. "And did you like the way in which the stones were laid inside?" asked my new friend. "Immensely," I replied. "The man who laid those stones was an artist who must have thought that his work would live through the ages." "Well, that is pleasant to hear," he said, "for the walls are my own day and dot." He had the Scottish accent when in earnest. "Fortunate man," I replied, "to have the means to build so fine a place, for I thought, naturally enough, that,
Being a rich man, he had built this hall at his own expense and presented it to the university. Fortunate, truly, he answered, but not in that sense. What I mean is, that I laid every one of those stones with my own hand. I was a working mason, and the builder of the hall gave me the job of laying the inside stonework, and I never had a job in my life in which I took so much pride and so much pleasure. While this man was working with his hands, he was working also with his brain. He took his degree, went to the bar, and became a man honored throughout the country. We applauded his brilliant lecture, but those silent, beautiful stones before him, which echoed our applause, must, I think, have been to him one cheer more, and a big one. Be ambitious, my boy. Embrace every opportunity, for such is the small end of a big thing. The small end comes first and may be good as a handle. My chance has come, said Commodore Dewey to a naval captain with whom he dined just before leaving Washington to assume command of the Asiatic Squadron early in 1898. You know, Farragut did not get his chance till he was over 60, but he took it, and something interfered with the conversation and the sentence was never finished in words, but the rest of it reverberated around the world from the roar of Dewey's guns at Manila.
Keep your eyes open. Hear, but say little. Count the cost before you bargain. Weigh matters before you buy, and if there is a possibility of success, grasp it. Spare no labor, nor shrink from danger, for in the words of Montrose, he either fears his fate too much, or his deserts are small, that dares not put it to the touch, to gain or lose it all. Industry stimulates honesty, honesty for its own sake, not because it is the best policy. Such sweetened by courtesy, seasons our attainments with a delightful relish and portends a rich reward. Industry means success in life. Without it, genius, ability, scholarship, and good intentions are of no avail. By industry, poverty, lack of opportunity, and the greatest obstacles in human life may be overcome, and success in life assured. The best thing I remember, said Chauncey Depew to a company of young men in New York, was my graduation from Yale. I made up my mind that day that I would lead a life of scholastic ease. I thought I would read a little, write a little, take it easy and have a good time. I had a hard-headed father of sturdy Dutch ancestry. He had enough money to take care of me, and I knew it, and when he discovered that I knew it and intended to act accordingly, it was a cold day for me. Said he, "You will never get $1 from me except through my will. From this time forth you have to make your own way." Well, I found I had a hard lot of it, nobody had a harder one, and my father stood by and watched me tussle and fight it out. I bless him for that tonight with all the heart and gratitude I have. If he had taken the other course, what should I have done? I should have been up in Peekskill tonight nursing a stove, complaining of the men who have succeeded in the world, and wondering by what exceptional luck they had got on, but having my way to dig alone, I got beyond everything my father dreamed of, but it was done by 14, or 16, or 18 hours work a day, if necessary. The path to any notable achievement, whether business or professional, is not easy. No pains, no gains, is an old English proverb, which is akin to the well-known one, no sweat, No sweet. Few are the royal roads to fame. Every house beautiful is situated on a hill difficulty, the pathway to which is lion guarded. He who has not the hardihood to climb the one and face the other will never cross the threshold of the palace.
Former Chief Justice Chase used to say that when he came to Washington, result, not of native ability alone, but of lifelong tireless industry. Addressing his students, he once asked, "Do you wish to become great?"
Remember, it means more hours at your desk. The greater you desire to become, the more hours you must work. Genius is not only the capacity for keeping at it, but taking pains in its accomplishments. Wellington's military genius was said to have been perfected by encounters with difficulties of apparently the most overwhelming character, yet such trained him to self-reliance, courage, and the highest discipline. A boy once wrote to Henry Ward Beecher soliciting his aid in securing an easy place wherein he might make his mark. Mr. Beecher replied, "You cannot be an editor. Do not try the law. Do not think of the ministry, let alone all ships, shops, and merchandise. Abhor politics. Don't practice medicine. Be not a farmer nor a mechanic. Neither be a soldier nor a sailor. Don't work. Don't study. Don't think. None of these are easy. My son, you have come into a hard world. I know of only one easy place in this world, and that is the grave. Indolence is a characteristic of some boys." Someone wrote, "A boy will hunt and a boy will fish, or play baseball all day. But a boy won't think and a boy won't work, because he's not built that way."
Doubtless this is a gross exaggeration. All boys are not made that way, though there are some who, at the thought of an errand, are as tired as a hound, very weary of life and of tramping around. But if there's a band or a circus in sight, they'll follow it gladly from morning till night. If there's work in the garden, their heads ache to split, and their backs are so lame that they can't dig a bit. But mention baseball, and they're cured very soon. And they'll dig for a woodchuck the whole afternoon. The father of Daniel and Ezekiel Webster, on leaving the home for a short time, gave these boys some special work on the farm. On his return, he found the labor unperformed, and frowning, demanded, "What have you been doing, Ezekiel?" "Nothing, sir," was the reply. "Well, Daniel, what have you been doing?" "Helping Zeke, sir," he answered. How many boys are likewise disposed? They care not, and, if they can help it, will not work. They are like a watch that wants both hands, as useless when it goes as when it stands. Idleness has been well expressed by the ancients as the burial of a living man. It is the very rust and canker of the soul, the devil's cushion, pillow, and chief reposel. The boy who courts it will experience no little personal feeling of disgust in after years. When along in life, he will be able to say with a French beggar, who, while undergoing a long imprisonment, tattooed upon his right arm, "The past has deceived me, the present torments me, the future terrifies me." Better heed Plato's advice, prefer diligence before idleness, unless you esteem rust above brightness, for idleness is the hour of temptation.
Wanted, a well-grown boy who can make himself generally useful. Salary moderate to start with. This was the advertisement that had called together some 25 boys. The merchant talked with one after another until only 2 remained in the outer office. "Come in, both of you," called the merchant. "I can tell you what I want and what I'm willing to pay." Then followed an enumeration of the services expected with the promise of $2.50 a week with an increase at the end of each 6 months. One of the 2 boys turned on his heel and said, "That settles it. I can't afford to work for any such wages as that." "I'll try it," said the other, "and if I suit you 6 months will soon pass. The $2.50 will pay my actual expenses, for I live at home. Then when I get to earning more I can help more." 5 years passed. The first boy idled away his time and went from bad to worse. At last he stood in the prisoner's dock awaiting trial for forgery. What was his astonishment to behold his former friend ranged on the side of the prosecution as junior member of a firm of eminent lawyers. There was no need for argument on either side, for the poor fellow broke down at the sight of his former schoolmate, and rising, said, "I'll tell the truth and take my punishment. If I'd begun as that young man did 5 years ago I might have been somebody today, but I was above low wages and didn't believe in small beginnings. Now I am a living example of what pride and indolence can do for a boy. Satan is sure to find mischief for idle hands, and the only way to keep clear of his work is to be busy at something, pay or no pay. Industry is one of the pet laws of nature, and as Periander, one of the 7 wise men of Greece, said, "Nothing is impossible to industry." It has conquered our American forests, built cities as by magic, improved prairies and valleys until they blossom like the rose, and made our civilization rich with the arts, both liberal and fine. Long before the Indians owned California, the gold fields were there. Before Franklin found electricity in the clouds, it was there. Before Marconi discovered the unseen waves of air to carry his messages across the sea, they were there. All that was needed was concentration, careful thinking and earnest, persistent effort to bring them into use.
All great men have had the gift of laboring intensely, continually and determinedly before succeeding, many of whom won their way against heavy odds. Arsaces, who founded the Parthian Empire, against which the mighty hosts of Rome long contended in vain, was a mechanic of obscure origin. Andersen, the popular Danish author, was the son of a cobbler, and in his earlier years worked on the bench, doing his literary work on scraps of paper during the moments of rest from his regular duties. Carrara began his life as a drummer boy and driver of cattle, but subsequently rose to the presidency of the Republic of Guatemala. Demosthenes, the Greek orator and prince of eloquence, was the son of a blacksmith. In his first attempt at public speaking, he displayed such a weakness of voice, imperfect articulation and awkwardness that he withdrew from the speaker's platform amidst the hooting and laughter of his hearers. Giotto, one of the founders of Italian art, was a shepherd boy whom Cimabue discovered drawing sheep in the sand with a pointed stone, with such accuracy that he took him as a student. Herschel, when a boy, played for balls, and while the dancers were lounging round the room he would go out and take a peep at the heavens through his telescope. It was while doing this that he discovered the Georgium Sidus, which made him famous. Samuel Richardson, the novelist, was a poor bookseller. He sold his books in the front part of the store, while he wrote them in the rear. It was a hard struggle. "My own industry and God's providence," said he, "have been my whole reliance." Locke, the English sculptor, reached success only through self-denial and hard work. He followed the plough by day and model by night. At length he went to London and took lodgings in an obscure house in a back street above a grocer's shop, and there began his statue of Milo. While working on it he went 3 months without meat. All the coal he used that winter was 1.5 bushels.
When Peter Cox found him, he was tearing up his shirt and dipping the strips into water to keep the clay moist. At last the statue was finished. The roof had been removed to finish its head. His work was soon noised abroad and sculptors took great interest in it. The Duke of Wellington went to see it and ordered a statue, and the boy who had struggled and suffered so much became the greatest sculptor of England. James Ferguson, the Scotch astronomer, was very anxious when a boy to understand the mechanism of watches. His father refused to allow him to play with his watch, and so James waited until a stranger called with a watch. "Will you be good enough to tell me what time it is?" asked the boy. The gentleman told him. "Would you be willing that I should look at your watch?" continued James. "Certainly," replied the gentleman. The boy took the watch eagerly. After examining it for a moment he asked, "What makes that box go round?" "A steel spring," replied the owner. "How can a steel spring in a box turn it round so as to wind up all the chain?" The gentleman explained the process. "I don't see through it yet," answered the boy. "Well, now," said the visitor, who had become interested, "take a long, thin piece of whalebone, hold one end of it fast between your thumb and forefinger, and wind it around your finger. It will then attempt to unwind, and if you fix the other end of it to the inside of a small hoop and leave it to itself, it will turn the hoop round and wind up a thread tied to the outside." "I see it. I see it," exclaimed the boy, enthusiastically. "Thank you, very much." It was not long before he had made a wooden watch, which he enclosed in a case about the size of a teacup. Soon after this he was set to watching sheep by night. Here he took an interest in the stars with as great a zeal as in the watch, and ere long became noted as a great astronomer. Boys of today are living in the most enlightened age, when everything is an improvement of the past.
Time was when man lived in caves, now in mansions, when he sailed the rivers in dugouts of trees, now in steamers, when he traveled overland in ox carts, now on steam cars, when he depended on fire or candlelight to banish darkness, now electricity, when he spun cotton and wove it by a crude hand machine, now the spinning jenny and power loom, when he wrote on the bark of a tree with a sharpened iron or stick, now on the finest paper with a typewriter, when he sent messages by swift runners, now by telegraph. He now holds communication with other continents by cable, brings distant worlds near with the telescope, examines a single hair of a fly with a microscope, and harnesses the elements of nature in his forward movement. All things are conquered, utilized, and perfected by industry. Fortune, as one said, is ever on the side of the industrious, as winds and waves are on the side of the best navigators. There is no reason why any industrious boy should not reach the pinnacle of success. To do so will doubtless mean struggles, hard thinking, careful planning, but the end pays for all. My boy, remember there is a place for you in the world. A place honorable, useful, influential, but it demands tireless exertion, steadfastness of purpose, carefulness of detail to reach and hold it. To neglect is to invite suffering in the future. If I neglect my practice a day, said Molly Brand the singer, I see the difference in my execution. If for 2 days, my friends see it, and if for a week, all the world knows my failure.
Philip's eye. The archer had an aim that accomplished something, and he that has not, cannot. It's the boys to shape the path for men, boys to guide the plow and pen, boys to forward the task begun. For the world's great task is never done. It's the boys who'll work that are needed. in sanctum or office or shop, remembering the lowlands are crowded, but there's room for the industrious on top. The boy who would be an intelligent and wise man needs to be studious. What may now seem irksome employment will prove a delight in after years. Through study he will not be a burden to himself, nor will his society be, as Seneca said, insupportable to others. Study whenever and wherever you can. Pliny in one of his letters relates how he used spare moments. Sometimes I hunt, but even then I carry with me a pocketbook, that whilst my servants are busied in disposing of nets and other matters, I may be employed in something that may be useful to me in my studies, and that if I miss of my game, I may at least bring home some of my thoughts with me, and not have the mortification of having caught nothing. In choosing subjects you will not have to combat with the difficulties our forefathers met, for in these days of cheap paper and cheap printing the whole world of literature is open to you. But here, my lad, let me warn you against the worthless, the pernicious trash with which the literary market is flooded. Study history with its descriptions of growth and decay of nations, science with its marvels and recent revelations, biographies of good and great men in nature whose pages are always open to view. Study everything which will lead you to look higher and feel nobler. The impression that study is only for those who attend school is decidedly wrong. If carried into practice, it would prove disastrous to one's success. There is no period in life when one can afford to be otherwise than studious. Had Henry Clay, after learning to write by filling a box with sand and tracing letters with a pointed stick, or had young Daniel Webster, after plucking his pen out of the wings of his mother's pet goose and making ink out of the soot scraped from the fireplace, ceased to go farther, their names as great speakers and writers would not be known. John Quincy Adams was considered the most learned man of his day. When his parents intended to keep him in school, he pleaded so earnestly to leave that they gave him his choice between two things: work on the farm or school. John said he thought he would work, and he was therewith assigned with other help and ditching. After working 3 days he became weary of his job, and coming to his father said, "Father, if you are willing, I guess I'll go back to school." In after life he confessed, "If I have accomplished anything as a scholar, I owe it to those 3 days' work in the abominable ditch."
General Lew Wallace, according to his own words, was a poor student in his young manhood. He grew tired of his college course after 6 weeks, and returned home. Calling him into his office, his father took from a pigeonhole in his desk a package of papers neatly folded and tied with red tape. These were the receipts for his tuition. After reading the items, the father said, "That sum represents what I have expended to provide you with a good education. After mature reflection, I have concluded that I have done for you, in that direction, all that can reasonably be expected of any parent, and I have, therefore, called you in to tell you that you have now reached an age when you must take up the lines yourself. If you have failed to profit by the advantages with which I have tried so hard to surround you, the responsibility must be yours. I shall not upbraid you for your neglect, but rather pity you for your indifference which you have shown to the golden opportunities you have been enabled to enjoy through my indulgence." Lew left the office thinking. The next day he set out with a determination to accomplish something for himself. He secured employment of the county clerk to copy the records of the courts. For months he worked in a dingy, half-lighted room, receiving his compensation 10 cents per 100 words. The tediousness and regularity of the work was a splendid drill besides teaching him the virtue of persistence as one of the avenues of success. He had a desire to become a lawyer, but realizing his deficiency in education, he was compelled to study evenings. "I was made to realize," said he, "the time I had spent with such lavish prodigality could not be recovered, and that I must extract every possible good out of the golden moments then flying by all too fast." This he did until Ben-Hur, one of the greatest books ever published, show how well he did it. To be studious is to be ambitious, to excel, to be anxious for the acquisition of such knowledge as will be beneficial. From any source it will be gathered as the bee gathers honey from any flower. "Drink deep or taste not the Pyrenean spring of knowledge," wrote an eminent poet.
"Study chiefly," said Lord Bacon to Cecil, "what you can turn to good account in your future life." James Russell Lowell once counseled his nephew, "A man is valuable in our day for what he knows, and his company will be always desired by others in exact proportion to the amount of intelligence and instruction he brings with him." William E. Gladstone in counseling boys said, "Get all the knowledge you can." And Theodore Roosevelt declared, "Shiftlessness, slackness, indifference to studying are almost certain to mean inability to get on in other walks of life." A boy accompanied an old hunter through the woods in search of game. Suddenly a partridge whirred from before their feet. The huntsman, with steady nerve, quick eye, and calculating brain, brought the bird down at the first shot. "How could you aim so quickly?" the lad inquired. "I didn't wait till I got into the woods to learn," was his chaffing reply. He had done what Stone, the author of the Mathematical Dictionary, did when perusing scientific works while aiding his father, who was gardener to the Duke of Argyll, had done, what David Livingstone did before he became Africa's explorer, while in the old Blantyre cotton works with a Latin grammar on his spinning jenny, had done, what Ezra Cornell did before he built a 2-story dwelling for his father's family when only 17 years of age, had done, what Henry Clay did with these off-hand efforts as he called his speeches in the cornfield before he stirred the country with his orations, made careful preparation beforehand. What one will be in manhood depends largely on what he is in boyhood. The loftiest attainments are nothing more than fruits of earnest study. There is no perfection, no great excellence without great labor. "It is the deepest soil," said Dewey, "that yields not only the richest fruits, but the fairest flowers. It is the most solid body which is not only the most useful, but which admits of the highest polish and brilliancy. It is the strongest pinion which not only carries the greatest burden, but which soars to the highest flight. It is the best education which fits a person for a responsible position. If a man succeeds who has had no education, he does so in spite of his misfortune and not by reason of it." Dickens owed less to education than probably any literary man.
He was not in school 2 years in his whole life, but he was a genius by right divine. Few are so richly endowed, hence a good education is a young man's best capital. He was called the dunce. His teacher would stand him apart from his class, for he could not or would not learn. One day a gentleman came into the room and seeing the lad standing, inquired the reason. "Oh, he is good for nothing," replied the teacher. "There's nothing in him. I can make nothing out of him. He is the most stupid boy in the school." The gentleman was stirred to pity. Going to him, he placed his hand on the head of the humiliated lad and said, "One of these days, you may be a fine scholar. Don't give up, but try, my boy, try." The boy's soul was aroused. His dormant intellect awoke. A new purpose was formed. Clenching his teeth, he said, "I will." From that hour, he became ambitious and studious. He became a great scholar, an author of a well-known commentary on the Bible, and was beloved and honored by many. This dunce was the celebrated Adam Clarke. The same was true of others. Isaac Newton was kicked by the brightest boy in the school because he was the most ignorant, but he said, "Never mind, I'll repay him by beating him in my studies." After a long time of earnest effort, he did it. Oliver Goldsmith in his boyhood was very stupid, but he resolved to surprise his fellow students, and this he did by writing that popular book, The Traveller. Sir Walter Scott was nicknamed the Blockhead when a student, but he declared, "I'll make them change it," and change it they did. Through close study, he attained such eminence that he was afterwards styled the Wizard of the North. Sir William Jones, the greatest scholar of Europe, was not a bright student. He was put into a class beyond his years, and where all the scholars had the advantage in that they had previous instruction that had been denied him. The teacher accused him of dullness, and all his efforts could not raise him from the foot of the class. He was not daunted. Procuring for himself grammars and other elementary textbooks, which the rest of the class had gone through in private terms, he devoted the hours of play, and some of the hours of sleep, to the mastering of them. By this, he soon shot ahead of his fellow pupils, and became the leader of the class and the pride of Harrow School. Dean Stanley was declared by Mr. Rawson, his schoolmaster, to be the stupidest boy at figures who ever came under his care, save only one, who was yet more hopeless, and was unable to grasp simple addition and multiplication, yet Arthur Stanley rose like a rocket at Rugby, achieved fame in Oxford, and became a blessing to mankind. The other developed a phenomenal mastery of arithmetic. Years after, he would make a budget speech of 3 hours' length and full of figures. He is known throughout the world as William E. Gladstone. Boys of studious mind may achieve an education if they desire. It may not be such as will enable them to secure a diploma from a college, but such as will make them successful and useful. All should strive for a college education. It is an investment, the returns of which in after years will be worth more and may do more than gold. Kitto, who was one of the greatest biblical scholars in the world, receiving from the University of Gießen the degree of Doctor of Divinity, craved for the greatest knowledge of his day. Notwithstanding his affliction of deafness, he begged his drunken father to take him from the poorhouse and let him struggle for an education. Said he, "I know how to stop hunger." Hottentots live a long time on nothing but
Macaulay always stopped at the foot of each page and gave a verbal account of what he read. Said he, "At first I had to read it 3 or 4 times before I got my mind firmly fixed. But I compelled myself to comply with the plan, until now, after I have read a book once through, I can almost recite it from beginning to end. It is a very simple habit to form early in life, and is valuable as a means of making our reading serve the best purpose." Granville Sharp was only an apprentice to a linen draper in London. To know the exact meaning of the scriptures, he mastered the Greek and Hebrew languages. A poor lame and almost blind African who had been cured by his brother's medical skill was recognized on the streets of the metropolis by his old master and claimed as a slave. Granville resolved that the Negro shall never more be in bondage. But what can he do? Slavery was then a legal right. Lord Chief Justice Mansfield was of the opinion that a slave did not become free by coming to England. Granville Sharp soon decided on his course. For 2 years he read and memorized law. Then came the tract from his pen, Injustice of Tolerating Slavery in England, which changed the mind of Mansfield and eventually made the slave trade of England illegal. Every boy should study by concentrating his mind. The reason of so much ignorance is not through a lack of educational facilities, but lack of will force and mental force to master a subject in hand. Many a boy commits his lessons parrot-like, with little or no disposition to understand the whys and wherefores, while another studies and inquires until he comprehends the reason of all that he learns. The result is, one masters his study, the other is mastered by his study. When Sir Isaac Newton was asked how he had discovered the true system of the universe, he replied, by continually thinking upon it. Every boy should study with eyes open. The inspired penman declared, "The wise man's eyes are in his head, not in his elbows or feet, though multitudes act as if they were. But in his head, just where they ought to be." In other words, the wise man is a careful observer. He possesses this faculty of comprehending the nature and reason of things. Not that observation alone ensures success, but this is one of the leading, indispensable elements of it. Professor Morse, who was judge of pottery at the World's Fair, Chicago, being asked to what he attributed his knowledge, answered, "To the habits of close inspection acquired in my boyhood when collecting shells." General Sherman explains his victorious march to the sea by saying that during his college days he spent a summer in Georgia. While his companions were occupied with playing cards and foolish talk, the young soldier tramped over the hills, made a careful map of the country, and years later his expert knowledge won the victory. Many persons go through life without an observation that is educative. 10 men will observe a steam engine only to admire its novelty. One studies each valve and screw until he understands the principle on which it is constructed. 10 travelers will pass through the country without noticing special peculiarities. One observes each tree, flower, hill, valley, and river. 10 readers will skim over a book, catching only its general drift. One criticizes style, expression, and thought, and is rapt with its beauties and sensitive to its faults. These are they who profit themselves and benefit others. Every boy should study by utilizing the moments. as success in business depends upon the small margin of profit secured and retained, rather than upon the large volume done, so success in life may depend upon our ability to save the moments, the precious margin that is left after we have done the things which are necessary in order to discharge our duties or earn our daily bread.
Dr. Cotton Mather would express his regret after the departure of a visitor who had wasted his time. "I would rather have given my visitor a handful of money than have been kept so long out of my study." Caesar, it is said, would not permit a campaign, however exacting, to deprive him of minutes when he could write his commentaries. Schliemann, standing in line at the post office and waiting for his letters when a boy, saved the fragments of time by studying Greek from a pocket grammar. Heine, the noted classicist of Germany, while shelling peas with one hand for dinner, held his book in the other. Matthew Hale's Contemplations was composed while he was traveling as circuit judge. Henry Kirk White learnt Greek while walking to and from a lawyer's office. Elihu Burritt is said to have mastered 18 languages and 22 dialects by improving the fragments of time in his blacksmith's shop. William E. Gladstone and Lord Lyttelton in their younger days always carried one of the smaller classics in their pockets to read if they had a leisure moment. Sir James Paget, in his youth, made tables of Cuvier's classifications while dressing, which he posted in his bedroom. Cardinal Manning, when an undergraduate at Oxford, acquired a satisfactory Italian vocabulary during the time spent in shaving. Phillips Brooks combined the processes of shaving and study, and it is said that Theodore Roosevelt carries constantly a small volume of Plutarch or Thucydides to read in spare moments. 15 minutes thus saved, or utilized, 4 times a day, gives us 30 hours in a month, the working time of about 60 days of 6 hours each in a year, or about 5 years study in 30 years' time. And 5 years well used yield more fruit than a whole lifetime squandered. Every boy should study for the pleasure and profit there is in it. Knowledge is power, and sometime, somewhere, the information will come useful. When Sherman's troops were passing through a critical experience during the Civil War, they captured a telegraph line of the enemy. Hastily cutting the wire, the general inquired if any of his men understood telegraphy. A young officer stepped forward saying, "One vacation I studied this art just for the pleasure of it." When Bishop Whipple came to Chicago to preach, he was anxious to reach the many artisans and railway operatives. He called upon William McAlpine, the chief engineer of the Galena Railway, and asked his advice as to the best way of approaching the employees of the road. "How much do you know about a steam engine?" asked McAlpine. "Nothing." "Then," said McAlpine, "read Lardner's Railway Economy until you are able to ask an engineer a question about a locomotive and he not think you a fool." The clergyman had the practical sense to see the justice of that advice. So he read up, and in due season went to the roundhouse of the Galena Railway, where he found a number of engineers standing by a locomotive which the firemen were cleaning. He saw that it was a Taunton engine with inside connections, and asked, at a venture, "Which do you like best, inside or outside connections?" This brought out information about steam heaters and variable exhausts, and in half an hour he had learned more than his book had ever taught him.
When he said goodbye, he added, "Boys, where do you go to church? I have a free church in Metropolitan Hall, where I shall be glad to see you, and if at any time you need me, shall be glad to go to you." The following Sunday, every man was in church. Years ago, when Mr. Gladstone was in active political service, he made some public addresses during a parliamentary recess that gave offense to the leaders of the opposite party. They thought it necessary to discipline him by what would be regarded as an official rebuke when Parliament should reassemble. He was to be convicted of breach of courtesy and violation of constitutional rights. In due course, the reprimand was administered. A conservative statesman of distinction was set up to chastise the offending lion. He rejoiced as a strong man to run a race. A splendid audience was present to see the thing done properly, and the conservative orator's wife had taken with her a party of friends to the House of Commons to aid in swelling the triumph. Through a long speech, Mr. Gladstone sat in silence.
He was accused of ignorance of English history and disregard for the English Constitution, rightly so sacred to every Englishman. After midnight he arose to reply. For 2 hours he poured forth his matchless eloquence. Not a point had escaped him. Not a fact or a sentiment of the arraignment had been overlooked or misplaced. He did not indulge in invective. He made no counter-charges. He emptied out his stores of history. He unfolded and eulogized the provisions of the British Constitution. He left no loophole of retreat for his adversaries. He overwhelmed them with the fullness of his knowledge and his oratory, and routed them most ignominiously. The noble lady and her friends had no occasion to celebrate a triumph. Mr. Gladstone's victory was largely due to his marvelous power of early study. My boy, be studious. You will find sometime a market for everything you know. Be patient in your studies. If things do not seem clear, do not give up. A dull, hazy morning often turns out a bright day. Dryden would think for 2 weeks in the composition of one of his odes. There are few things which patient labor will not enable one to accomplish. Difficulties like specters melt when approached. It is not one stroke of the axe that fells the tree, or one blow of the hammer that demolishes the rock, but the repetition. Study everything of advantage, but bend energy and mind mostly in the line of your life work. Study for what it will do for you. Study for what you can do for others, and never give up study. The boy that by addition grows, and suffers no subtraction, who multiplies the thing he knows, and carries every fraction, who well divides his precious time, the due proportions giving, to secure success aloft will climb, interest compound receiving,